Hello, my name is Nathan Scott. I have lived 33 years of my life, and so far I see my life as resembling a press book that I often write, full of harsh realities interspersed with warm moments, but always with a hazy layer of doubt and tension. I live in Boston, Massachusetts, a bustling city with winding cobblestone streets and skyscrapers, where the sea breeze from Massachusetts Bay blows in, carrying the salty smell and the blaring horns of ships. That's where I work as an investigative journalist for the Boston Herald, a job that demands integrity to the point where sometimes I feel like a lone wolf among sheep. I come from a middle-class family, not wealthy but never lacking, and that has shaped my character. Calm, always protecting the vulnerable and never afraid to speak out about what I think is wrong. Let me tell it from the beginning, from my childhood days in Portland, Maine, a small coastal town where everything seemed more peaceful, but actually hid so many undercurrents. Portland is my hometown, where I was born and raised in a 2-story wooden house with a backyard overlooking Casco Bay. My father, John Scott, is a retired state employee who once worked in the local tax office. He is a tall man with prematurely gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and a deep, warm voice full of authority. Dad always lived by traditional principles. Family comes first. Dignity must be preserved and never do anything that would make the neighbors gossip. My mother, Kathleen Scott, was also a civil servant, working in the city administrative office before retiring. She is a gentle woman with a warm smile, but deep inside she has a conservative shell, always worried about the family image in society's eyes. They are typical parents of the baby boomer generation, hardworking, frugal, and believing that life will be smooth as long as you follow the rules. I remember vividly those summer afternoons in Portland when I was a 10-year-old boy running around on Old Orchard Beach with my sister Brooke. Brooke is 6 years younger than me, and from a young age she has been my golden little sister, a feisty and stubborn girl who makes everyone shake their heads. Brooke isn't the type of girl who sits quietly. She often got into fights at school not because she's mean, but because she couldn't stand injustice. I remember one time when Brooke was only 8, she charged in and hit a bigger boy for daring to tease a disabled kid. The result? I found Brooke with a swollen cheek, and that boy got a real beating from me. "I won't let anyone hurt you anymore," I whispered then, and that promise has stayed with me until now. Brooke lives very emotionally despite her stubborn exterior. She often cries alone when sad, and only I know how to comfort her by telling stories about the imaginary adventures we once dreamed up together. Our family was close-knit, I have to say. Sunday dinners were always full of laughter, with Dad's grilled meat and Mom's apple pie. We would sit around the table sharing stories from the past week. Dad talking about quirky tax cases, Mom showing off her newly bloomed flower garden, Brooke excitedly recounting her volleyball games at school, and me, the book-loving kid, often sharing articles I'd read in the Portland Press-Herald. But that closeness wasn't always smooth. I was always straight-talking, and that often caused tension. Like when I was 15 and I discovered Dad was hiding a small debt from sports gambling. I didn't stay silent. I blurted it out right in the middle of dinner, making Dad turn red and Mom cry. "Son, why don't you think about the family's dignity?" Dad yelled. But I only thought about the truth. Hiding it only makes things worse. From then on, the family atmosphere was sometimes heavy, like a dark cloud hanging, waiting for the storm. As I grew up, I left Portland to attend college in Boston, majoring in journalism. It was a decision that made my parents proud, mixed with worry. "Son, journalism is dangerous, always clashing with power," Mom would say, her voice trembling. But I couldn't be otherwise. The job of investigative journalism chose me, or rather, I chose it because of my belief in justice. I remember my first case, investigating a local company dumping toxic waste into the Androscoggin River in Maine. I spent months gathering evidence, interviewing victims, poor people who got cancer from polluted water. When the article was published, the company was sued and I received my first award. At that moment, I felt like a knight, protecting the vulnerable. But that joy also came with loneliness. Friends distanced themselves out of fear of involvement, and my family worried that I was too straightforward. Now at 33, my life in Boston is fairly stable. I rent a small apartment in the Back Bay area with a view overlooking the Charles River. Every morning I wake up early, brew black coffee, and sit reading the news before heading to the newsroom. The work is busy, investigating corruption, financial scandals, and sometimes personal cases that make my heart ache. Like the most recent one about a young girl being harassed at work by a big boss. I helped her go public and the guy was fired. That's why I love this job. It gives me the feeling that I'm doing the right thing, even if sometimes at the cost of isolation. My family is still my support, even with occasional disagreements. I often visit Portland on weekends, driving along Interstate 95, listening to classic rock to shake off the fatigue. Mom and Dad are retired now, living in the old house with a vegetable garden in the back. Dad often sits on the porch reading the newspaper. Mom is busy with the local book club. They still hold traditional views, wanting their children to settle down, start families, and not cause trouble. Sometimes I lie awake in bed in Boston thinking about my family and wondering if I'm too harsh. Like the most recent time when I came home for dinner, I criticized Dad for supporting a local politician I knew was corrupt. "Son, don't go digging for dirt," Mom intervened, her eyes red. Dad stayed silent, but I saw him clench his fist. The atmosphere was so tense that Brooke had to crack a joke to save it. "Brother Nathan, are you some superhero always saving the world?" She laughed, but I knew she was worried. The family is close-knit, but those cracks hurt me. I love them enough to speak the bitter truth. Brooke, my sister, now 27 years old, is working at an advertising company also in Boston near me. She's still as stubborn as ever, but now with added romance. We often meet at coffee shops, chatting about random things. "Brother Nathan, you're always worrying too much." Brooke often teases me when I advise her to be careful with boyfriends. But deep down, I know I'm her support. No one is allowed to hurt Brooke. That's my unbreakable rule. I once saw Brooke cry because of an ex-boyfriend who scammed her out of money. "Brother, I'm so stupid. He borrowed $5,000 from me and disappeared," Brooke sobbed. I wiped her tears. "It's okay, I'll help you." And I did. I tracked the guy down and threatened to expose him if he didn't pay back. Now in my 30s, I'm still single, focused on work. Friends tease, "Nathan, you're like an old man, always so serious." But I don't care. I like this life. Free, integrity-driven, and ready to protect those I love. Portland is still my peaceful haven where I go to recharge. The last time I went home, Mom and Dad organized a small party, and Brooke excitedly talked about her job and about a guy she just met. "I met an amazing guy, Brother Nathan. This time it's real." Brooke smiled brightly. I smiled back, but my heart was uneasy. "Tell me about him," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. And that's when everything began. The story about Nick, the young heir of a wealthy family. "His name is Nick Harrington," Brooke said, her face flushing as she looked at me. "He works at the family company, a large corporation in auto parts manufacturing. Nathan, you won't believe it, he's different, gallant, polite, and he really cares about me." She hesitated, then laughed loudly. "Next week, I'll bring him home to introduce. Mom, Dad, you'll like him, I bet." Dad raised an eyebrow, curious. "Family company, huh? Sounds promising. His family must be wealthy, right?" Mom smiled, setting down the salad plate on the table. "The important thing is how he treats you, Brooke. But if he's a decent person, Mom supports it." I stayed silent, sipping my cold water, but my mind had already started analyzing. Nick Harrington. The name sounded familiar, like a snippet of news I'd skimmed through at the newsroom. I tried to recall, but nothing was clear. Just a gut feeling, something I'd learned from journalism, that anything too perfect often has issues. That day I didn't say much, just listened to Brooke go on and on about Nick. He had studied in Europe, drove a Porsche, and had taken her to fancy restaurants in Boston that just hearing the names made my wallet hurt. He said he wants to take me to Paris, Brooke recounted, her eyes dreamy. He said if everything goes well, we'll get engaged by the end of the year. I nearly choked on my water. Engaged? How long had they even known each other? I looked over at Mom and Dad, hoping they'd ask questions, but Dad just nodded contentedly and Mom smiled with satisfaction. Sounds like a guy who knows how to take care of things, Dad said. Bring him here so Mom and Dad can see his face. I couldn't hold back and spoke up. Brooke, how long have you known this guy? Why the rush? The whole table turned to look at me and Brooke's smile froze. Brother Nathan, you're always suspicious of everything, she said, her voice a bit sharp. I've known Nick for 3 months, and he's a good person. Don't overdo it, okay? Mom placed her hand on Brooke's shoulder as if to soothe her. Nathan, don't worry. Let Brooke decide for herself. She's grown up now. I sighed, knowing that if I continued, the atmosphere would get tense. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Nick Harrington. I told myself I had to check this name. A week later, Brooke kept her word. She brought Nick home on a Saturday evening, when the Portland weather was starting to cool and the early autumn winds blew through, making golden leaves fall all over the yard. I drove from Boston, not very excited, but still wanting to see the perfect guy of my little sister with my own eyes. When I stepped into the house, the atmosphere was unusually lively. Dad was wearing a neatly ironed shirt. Mom had on her favorite apron, but her hair was carefully styled. Brooke was stunning in a red dress, standing next to a tall man in an expensive gray suit, with sleekly combed hair and a confident smile that was almost staged. Brother Nathan, this is Nick, Brooke introduced, her voice excited. Nick shook my hand, a firm grip but with cold, sharp eyes as if assessing me. Nice to meet you, Nathan. Brooke has told me a lot about you. The famous journalist in Boston, right? His voice was smooth, but something about it gave me chills. I nodded, responding with a polite smile. Not that famous, just doing what I like. That dinner was a performance. Nick talked about the family company, Harrington Industries, specializing in auto parts manufacturing, with factories in 3 states and expanding to Asia. He spoke about business trips to London, Tokyo, and big projects he personally oversaw. My parents were drawn in, especially Dad. You remind me of my younger days, daring to think and act, Dad laughed heartily, patting Nick on the shoulder. Mom oohed and awed when Nick gave her an expensive bottle of French wine and Dad a box of Cuban cigars. I want to thank the family for raising such a wonderful Brooke, Nick said, looking at Brooke with sweet eyes. Brooke blushed, holding his hand under the table. But I wasn't drawn in. Something wasn't right. The way Nick answered questions about his family, too smooth, as if he'd rehearsed it hundreds of times. When I asked about the expansion plans to Asia, he brushed over it quickly, changing the topic to travel. I observed how he smiled, how he looked at Brooke, like an actor in character. I didn't say anything, just memorized every detail. At the end of the meal, Nick stood up, raising his glass. Uncle, Aunt, I truly respect this family. I hope to soon become a part of your family. Mom clapped, her eyes teary. Dad nodded approvingly. Brooke looked like she was about to float away. Only me, sitting at the end of the table, felt my stomach churn. After dinner, when Nick and Brooke went out to the front yard to take photos, I pulled Mom into the kitchen. Mom, don't you think Nick is a bit too perfect? Mom frowned. Nathan, you're suspicious again. He's kind, loves Brooke, his family is well off. Don't you want your little sister to be happy? I shook my head, not wanting to argue, but I knew I had to act. Nick Harrington. His name was like a puzzle piece, and I would find out the truth. The next morning, I drove back to Boston, my mind heavy. The image of Nick with his perfect smile haunted me. I'm not someone who's overly suspicious or envious, but there was something about him that I just couldn't trust. As soon as I arrived at the newsroom, I opened my laptop and typed Nick Harrington into the Boston Herald's internal database. Nothing stood out immediately, just a few short articles about Harrington Industries. the family company that Nick had bragged about. But I didn't stop there. I called Charlie, an old colleague at the New York Times who specialized in hunting down financial scandals. "Charlie, have you heard anything about Harrington Industries?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Charlie chuckled over the phone. "Harrington? Oh, Nathan, you've poked a hornet's nest. That company's drowning in debt, rumors of impending bankruptcy. But they're good at covering it up. Digging into that family isn't easy." My heart raced. "I figured as much. Send me everything you've got," I said, then hung up. A few weeks later, I received an email from Charlie with the subject, "You owe me a beer." Inside was a long string of information. I skimmed through the flowery, empty introductions, stopping only at the key facts. Harrington Industries was over $30 million in debt to banks. Investors were pulling out one by one, and there were rampant rumors of financial tricks to hide the gaps. But what chilled me to the bone was a short note. Nick Harrington, son of the CEO, was sued for sexual harassment in 2019, but the case was settled quickly. My blood rushed to my head. Sexual harassment. And Brooke was planning to marry this guy. I continued digging deeper, contacting an old source at the Boston court. After a few calls, I got more details. The 2019 lawsuit involved a female employee at Harrington Industries who accused Nick of inappropriate behavior during a business trip. The case was withdrawn after the Harrington family paid a large sum. There was no official verdict, but the victim's statement was still in the records. I read through it, and each line stabbed at my heart. He cornered me, saying that if I didn't cooperate, I'd lose my job. I sat frozen in front of the screen. Brooke, my little sister, the one I'd promised to protect since we were kids. How could I let her marry someone like that? I called Brooke right away, but she didn't pick up. I texted, "Brooke, I need to talk about Nick." 10 minutes later, she replied, "Brother Nathan, stop it. I'm happy, don't ruin everything." I gripped the phone tightly, a sense of helplessness surging. I called again, and this time she answered, but her voice was cold. "Brother Nathan, I know you're worried about me, but Nick isn't like the guys before. He loves me. Don't go investigating randomly, okay? I don't want to argue." "Brooke, listen to me." I tried to stay calm. "I found some things about Nick. He's not a good person. His family's company is about to go bankrupt, and there's something worse." Brooke cut me off. "You're jealous, aren't you? Because I found someone good while you're living alone with your articles. Don't you want me to be happy?" She hung up, leaving me with the long beep. I didn't give up. I called my parents, hoping they'd listen. But Mom just sighed over the phone. "Nathan, you're always too sensitive. Nick is a good guy from a prestigious family. Don't make a big deal out of it, I beg you." Dad was harsher. "You're an overly sensitive and suspicious journalist, Nathan. Don't assume everyone is evil like that. Just let Brooke live her life." I hung up, feeling like the whole world had turned its back on me, but I couldn't stop, not when Brooke was heading into danger. That night, I sat in my Back Bay apartment, the lights from the Charles River reflecting on the window. I opened my laptop and continued digging deeper. An anonymous source sent me an old document, an internal financial report from Harrington Industries, showing they had deliberately inflated profits to attract investments. Nick, as the promising heir, was part of that charade. I clenched my fist, thinking about Brooke, the girl who once believed in fairy tales, now being deceived by a dangerous man. I had to do something. But how could I make my sister and family believe me when they were already enchanted by Nick? In the days that followed, I was like a lost soul. Work at the newsroom passed by like a hazy dream, with my mind revolving solely around Brooke and Nick. Every time I called her, either she didn't pick up or she responded curtly, "Brother Nathan, I'm busy. Don't call anymore." My parents avoided the topic of Nick as if I were a troublemaker not worth paying attention to. I knew I needed more evidence, but time wasn't waiting. Brooke texted me that the extended family would gather in Portland over the weekend to discuss the wedding. "Come back, but don't cause trouble," she wrote, with a smiley face emoji. I sighed, nodding to myself. I would go, but not to sit idly by. The family gathering day arrived with Portland's sky gray and overcast, heavy clouds foretelling a storm. I drove from Boston, the radio playing Hotel California, a haunting melody matching my mood. When I arrived home, the front yard was full of cars from the extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who only showed up for major holidays. The old wooden house was packed, lively chatter echoing from the living room, mixed with the smell of grilled meat and Mom's apple pie. But that atmosphere didn't warm me. I stepped in, immediately sensing wary glances. "Nathan, you're here," Mom said, her voice light but her eyes avoiding mine. Dad just nodded, continuing his conversation with Uncle Frank about football. Brooke stood in the corner of the room wearing a green wool dress, her hair tied high, but her smile was stiff, as if trying to hide something. Dinner began, and the topic quickly turned to the wedding. Brooke stood up, her voice excited but slightly trembling. "Everyone, I have good news. Nick's family has agreed to let us hold the wedding at the Oceanfront Hotel, a 5-star venue in Portland. It will be a dream wedding with imported flowers, live music, and a top photographer." She paused, looking around the table, then continued in a softer voice. "But Nick's family says according to tradition, the bride's family will cover all the costs. They say it's a gift to see their daughter off in marriage, showing our family's affection for me." The atmosphere in the room froze. Mom stiffened, setting her spoon down on the table. Dad furrowed his brow, gripping his wine glass tightly. Aunt Mary, Mom's cousin, broke the silence. "All the costs? You mean including that 5-star hotel?" Brooke nodded, her face flushing red. "Yes, Aunt. But Nick said his family will handle the honeymoon, so I think it's fair." "Fair?" I felt hot blood rushing to my head. Fair what, when the groom's family was clearly shoving the financial burden onto our shoulders? Uncle Frank, who always liked to boast, laughed loudly. "Well, the Harringtons are so wealthy, if we can afford it, let's do it. Brooke's wedding has to be grand." A few people nodded, but I saw Mom discreetly wipe her eyes. Dad sighed, clearly calculating in his head. I couldn't sit still anymore. I stood up, my voice calm but firm. "Hold on. I have something to say." The whole table turned to look at me. Brooke frowned, her eyes flashing with anger. Mom and Dad paled, as if knowing I was about to do something uncontrollable. "Nathan, sit down," Dad said, his voice low but full of warning. I shook my head. "No, Dad. Everyone needs to know the truth before pouring money into this wedding." I took a deep breath, looking around the table, curious, suspicious, and even annoyed eyes. "Nick Harrington isn't trustworthy, I've investigated. Harrington Industries is drowning in debt, owing banks tens of millions of dollars. They're on the verge of bankruptcy, and demanding that our family cover all the wedding costs? That's not tradition. It's an excuse for them to shirk responsibility. They're exploiting Brooke, exploiting our family." Murmurs erupted. Brooke jumped up, her voice trembling with rage. "Brother Nathan, you're crazy. What do you know about Nick to say that? You just want to ruin my happiness." Mom pulled Brooke's hand, trying to soothe her. "Nathan, dear, don't make a big deal. The girl is happy." But I didn't stop. "Mom, I'm not making this up. I have evidence. Nick was even sued for sexual harassment. The case was settled, but the truth can't be erased." The room exploded. Uncle Frank slammed the table. "Nathan, you've gone too far. Who do you think you are, a detective? The Harringtons are a prestigious family. Don't slander them." Aunt Mary shook her head, looking at me like a traitor. "You're jealous because Brooke found someone good, right? Being a journalist and always stirring up trouble." A few cousins whispered among themselves, some even smirking. Dad stood up, his face flushed. "Nathan, enough. You're destroying this family. If you won't cooperate, get out now." Mom cried, pulling Dad's hand. "John, calm down." "But Nathan, you've disappointed me so much." I felt my heart being squeezed. The whole family, the people I loved most, were turning their backs on me. I looked at Brooke, hoping to see a hint of trust in her eyes, but she just shook her head, tears streaming down. "Brother Nathan, why won't you leave me alone? What do you want, to embarrass the whole family?" I wanted to shout, to pull out all the documents, but I knew now wasn't the time. I needed stronger evidence, needed time. But time was running out. Amid the chaos, I caught Aunt Teresa's eye. She sat at the end of the table, quietly sipping her coffee, but her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through everything. Aunt Teresa, a former Wall Street businesswoman, was the only one not swept up in the Nick Harrington fever. As everyone started debating and arguing about the wedding costs again, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Meet me on the porch after dinner. I'll help you." I left the table, stepping out to the backyard, breathing in Portland's cold air. The sound of waves from Casco Bay echoed, but it didn't soothe the storm in my heart. I thought about Brooke, about her disappointed eyes. I thought about my parents, about how they chose to believe Nick's promises over me. I thought about the wedding cost demand, a financial burden our family couldn't afford, and I knew it was the clearest sign of deception. The Harringtons were using Brooke to polish their image, to hide their massive debts. But how could I make my family see that? A moment later, Aunt Teresa stepped out from inside. She wore a thick wool coat, leaning against the railing, looking out to sea. "Nathan," she said, her voice low but firm, "I believe you. That Nick boy and his family have something off. I heard about Harrington Industries when I was on Wall Street. They're not as clean as they appear. The debt rumors, I've heard whispers too." I looked at her, feeling like I'd found a ray of light in the darkness. "Aunt, I need more concrete evidence. I can't let Brooke marry him." Aunt Teresa nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I have some old connections, lawyers, people in finance. I'll help you dig deeper, but Nathan, you have to stay calm and careful. Don't be rash like today." I nodded, feeling both grateful and anxious. "I understand, Aunt, but I can't stop. Not when Brooke is in danger." She nodded in agreement, patting my shoulder. That night, I lay on the bed in my old room, listening to the wind howling through the window. I thought about the promise I made to Brooke years ago when I wiped the blood from her face after a school fight. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But now I was the one hurting her. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to protect her. The family gathering had ended, but the real storm was just beginning. I knew I was entering a battle, not just with Nick, but with the whole family. And Aunt Teresa was my only ally. But that was enough. I would uncover the truth no matter the cost. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling, as if the whole world was pressing down on my chest. I drove back to Boston, trying to focus on Interstate 95, but my mind was filled only with images of Brooke crying, Mom's disappointed eyes, and Dad's shouting voice. I had tried to warn them, but no one would listen. Instead, they looked at me like a troublemaker, someone who wanted to steal away my little sister's happiness. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, telling myself to stay strong. I couldn't give up, not when Brooke was rushing into danger. When I got back to my apartment in Back Bay, I received an email from Mom. Subject: wedding costs. I opened it, and my heart seemed to stop. It was a detailed budget, listing everything for a lavish wedding. The reception at the 5-star oceanfront hotel, flowers imported from the Netherlands, a live band from New York, a photographer who had worked for Vogue magazine, and even a 7-day honeymoon in Europe, Paris, Rome, and Santorini. Total cost, over $250,000. Of that, the wedding itself was $200,000. I skimmed through it, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. $200,000? Our family isn't wealthy. Mom and Dad live on their pensions and modest savings. How could they afford it? But what stunned me even more was the note at the end of the email, written by Dad. "Nathan, we hope you'll contribute $100,000, half the cost, like a decent big brother. After what you did at the family gathering, you should feel lucky to still be involved in contributing to your sister's happy day." I read it over and over, unable to believe my eyes. Not a single invitation to the wedding, Just a demand for money accompanied by a slap in the face implying that I was the troublemaker. And paying up was a way to make amends. I slumped into the chair, my hands trembling. $100,000? I work in journalism, not as a millionaire. My small apartment in Back Bay already eats up most of my income, and my meager savings are only for emergencies. But more than that, I felt pain. Pain because my family wasn't just turning their backs, but also excluding me from Brooke's big day, as if I were an outsider, only worthy of contributing money. I thought about Brooke, about the look in her eyes when she screamed that I was ruining her happiness. I thought about my parents, about how they chose to believe Nick's promises over me. I wanted to call them, wanted to shout that I wasn't the enemy, but I knew it would be pointless. They had chosen to side with Nick. I sipped my cold coffee, looking out at the Charles River. The city lights reflected on the water, but they didn't soothe the anger in my heart. I wondered, how could they be so blind? How could they not see that this cost demand was the clearest sign of deception? The Harringtons were exploiting Brooke, exploiting our entire family to cover up their massive debts. But I didn't have time for self-pity. I opened my laptop and sent a message to Aunt Teresa. "Aunt, I need to meet. I won't let this continue." Aunt Teresa replied immediately. "Tonight, the coffee shop on Commercial Street, 8 o'clock. I nodded at the screen, feeling like I'd found a ray of light in the darkness. I wouldn't pay the $100,000. I wouldn't stand by and watch Brooke walk into a dangerous marriage. I would fight, even if it was alone. That evening, I met Aunt Teresa at a small coffee shop in Portland, where the aroma of roasted coffee blended with the salty sea breeze. She sat in the corner of the room wearing a thick wool coat, with a cup of espresso and a thin stack of documents in front of her. She looked at me, her eyes sharp but full of concern. "Nathan," she said, her voice low, "are you sure you want to go through with this? The Harringtons aren't easy opponents." I nodded, clenching my fists. "Aunt, I have no choice. Brooke is my little sister. I can't let her marry someone like Nick." Aunt Teresa pushed the stack of documents toward me. "This is what I've gathered from an old friend at the bank. Harrington Industries owes over $40 million, mostly borrowed from international banks. They've inflated their financial reports to attract investments, but investors are pulling out. The company could go bankrupt within 6 months." I flipped through the pages, my heart racing. Detailed figures, charts, and even internal emails between Harrington Industries executives, all confirming what I had suspected. But it wasn't enough. I needed something more direct, something that could strike right at Nick. "Do you have anything on the harassment case?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Aunt Teresa frowned and pulled out her phone. "I've contacted a lawyer who handled the 2019 lawsuit. The girl, Sarah Mitchell, signed a non-disclosure agreement, but the lawyer still has a copy of her statement. I'll send it to you via email, but Nathan, be careful. If you go public with this, the Harringtons will sue you for breaching the agreement." I nodded, feeling like I was walking a thin tightrope. "I understand, Aunt, but I need the truth." Over the next 2 days, I worked like a machine that wouldn't stop. I contacted old sources, a journalist in New York, a banker in Boston, and a former Harrington Industries employee who had been fired for knowing too much. Each piece of information was like a puzzle piece, gradually revealing the dark picture of Nick and his family. I uncovered an additional detail that made my blood boil. The Harringtons were planning to use Brooke and Nick's wedding as a PR stunt, inviting major investors to attend in order to polish the company's image. They needed a grand event to hide their disastrous financial situation, and Brooke, my innocent little sister, was just a pawn in their game. Sarah Mitchell's statement arrived on the second night via an encrypted email from Aunt Teresa's lawyer. I read every line, feeling like a knife was twisting in my heart. Sarah, a 25-year-old employee, recounted how Nick had cornered her during a business trip, groping her and saying vulgar things, at the same time threatening to fire her if she didn't cooperate. She refused, and a few weeks later she was dismissed for not meeting requirements. Sarah sued, but the Harrington family paid $30,000 for her to withdraw the complaint and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I gripped the computer mouse tightly, imagining Brooke in a situation like Sarah's. No, I wouldn't let that happen. Time passed quickly like a nightmare. Only 3 days left before the wedding, and I knew I had to act. I called Brooke one more time, hoping she would listen. "Brooke, I have proof about Nick. You have to meet me." But she hung up immediately, leaving only a message. "Brother Nathan, stop it. I don't want to hear anymore." I stared at the phone screen, a sense of helplessness surging. But I couldn't stop. Not now. The night before the wedding, I sat in my apartment organizing everything. I printed the documents, carefully folding them into a large envelope. I prepared a short speech, enough to make the truth clear without causing chaos. I knew I was taking a risk, not just with the Harringtons, but with my family. But I thought about Brooke, about the little girl who once held my hand on Old Orchard Beach, believing I was her knight. I couldn't let her fall into the hands of someone like Nick. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Tomorrow at the Oceanfront Hotel, I would show up. Uninvited, unwelcome, but I would be there, with the truth in hand. I knew the consequences would be unpredictable, but I was ready. For Brooke, for the promise from years ago. The wedding day arrived with Portland's sky unusually clear and blue, as if the weather was mocking the chaos about to unfold. I stood in front of the mirror in my Boston apartment, putting on a neatly pressed black suit and tying a dark green tie, the outfit I had worn when I received my first journalism award. I looked at myself in the mirror, not as Nathan Scott, the investigative journalist, but as Nathan Scott, the big brother trying to save his little sister from the biggest mistake of her life. The envelope of documents sat in my jacket pocket, weighing heavily like it carried the fate of my entire family. I checked one last time, the falsified financial reports, Sarah Mitchell's statement, and an old article about the Harrington Industries scandal. Everything was carefully organized, ready to be exposed. I drove to Portland, my heart pounding in rhythm with the rock music on the radio. The Oceanfront Hotel appeared in the distance, magnificent like a palace by the sea, with white marble columns and gleaming glass doors. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, from Bentleys to Rolls-Royces, and I spotted vehicles from major news outlets. Boston Globe, Portland Press Herald, even a local TV channel's news van. This wedding wasn't just a family event, it was a spectacle for the elite, where the Harringtons flaunted their wealth and power. But I knew that beneath the glamorous facade was a pile of debts and dark secrets. I parked in a far corner, avoiding the security guard's eyes. I wasn't invited, and my family certainly didn't want me there. I entered the hotel lobby, blending into the stream of elegantly dressed guests. Women in sparkling evening gowns, men in expensive suits, laughter and the clinking of wine glasses echoing everywhere. I kept my head down, pulling my hat brim low, trying not to draw attention. No one recognized me, a lowly journalist amid this crowd of the privileged. I weaved through the people, heading to the main hall where the wedding was being prepared. A live band played Canon in D, and the scent of imported roses filled the air. I stood in the corner of the room, observing. Brooke was stunning in her white wedding dress, her hair pinned up high with a small sparkling tiara. She smiled, but I saw her hands trembling as she held Nick's. He, as usual, looked perfect in his tuxedo, with a confident smile but cold, sharp eyes. My parents sat in the front row, Mom in an emerald green dress, Dad in a gray suit, both tense but trying to maintain a perfect appearance. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were scattered throughout the hall, and I spotted Aunt Teresa in the back row, her eyes glancing over me, giving a slight nod as if signaling, "Do it, Nathan." The ceremony began. The MC, a middle-aged man with a sophisticated voice, stepped onto the stage holding the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is a special day as we witness the union of two souls, Brooke Scott and Nick Harrington." Applause erupted, but I felt my stomach churn. This was the moment. I took a deep breath, stepping out from the dark corner and heading toward the stage. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but I couldn't stop. I wasn't invited, but I had to be there. For Brooke. As I stepped onto the platform, the entire hall fell silent. Brooke turned around, her eyes widening, her face shifting from surprise to anger. "Nathan!" she said loudly, her voice breaking. Nick frowned, his eyes sharp as knives. My dad jumped up, his face flushed red, ready to rush forward and drag me down. "Nathan, what the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. But Mom gripped his hand tightly, whispering, "John, don't. Everyone is watching." She was afraid of losing face in front of the groom's family, in front of the elite guests. I looked at Mom, seeing the pained look in her eyes, but I couldn't stop. I approached the MC, handing him the envelope of documents. "Before the marriage, perhaps everyone should know about this," I said, my voice calm but firm. The MC looked at me, confused, then opened the envelope. He skimmed through the papers, and I saw his face turn pale. What is this?" he stammered. I didn't answer, just gestured for him to continue. "Read it," I said, then turned to face the hall where hundreds of eyes were now fixed on me. The MC trembled, his voice hesitant as he read. "This is documents about Harrington Industries. Debt to banks over $40 million. Falsified financial reports." He paused, looking at me as if pleading for help. I nodded, stepping over to the technical control table in the corner of the stage, where a staff member was fumbling with the projector. "Project it up," I said, handing him Aunt Teresa's USB. The staff member hesitated, but my determined gaze made him comply. The large screen behind the stage lit up, and a series of documents appeared. Falsified financial reports, internal emails from Harrington Industries discussing debt concealment, a copy of Sarah Mitchell's statement about Nick's harassment, and an old article about the company's financial scandal. The hall erupted in murmurs. Guests, from wealthy entrepreneurs to press reporters, began whispering and pointing. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures of the screen. Nick rushed onto the stage, his face flushed red, roaring, "This is slander! You sick bastard! The bride's family is trying to smear my family's honor." He pointed at me, his eyes like he wanted to devour me alive. "You're trash, Nathan. You're jealous because I'm getting your sister." Brooke stood below the stage, tears streaming down, screaming, "Brother Nathan, you're the worst brother ever. I wish I didn't have you." Her words cut into my heart like a knife, but I stood firm, looking straight at Nick. "The truth doesn't need excuses, Nick," I said, my voice cold. Mrs. Helen, Nick's mother, stood up from the front row on the groom's side, her face hardening like stone. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice icy sharp. "The Harrington family cannot accept this humiliation. The wedding is canceled. We will not let our family honor be tarnished." She turned to my parents, her eyes full of contempt. "Your family is not worthy of us." Then she dragged Nick off the stage, followed by the rest of the Harringtons, walking away amid the chaos. The hall exploded. Press reporters surged toward Nick, cameras flashing nonstop, microphones thrust at him. "Mr. Harrington, do you have any comment on these allegations? Is your company really on the verge of bankruptcy?" Nick shoved them aside, trying to run to the door, but the flashing lights and relentless questions wouldn't let up. I stood on the stage, watching the scene, feeling both relieved and pained. The truth had been exposed, but at what cost? Below, my family was shattered. Dad rushed near the stage, pointing at me, his face flushed. "Nathan, you've ruined everything. Are you satisfied now? You wanted the whole family to lose face?" Mom sobbed uncontrollably, pulling Dad's hand. "John, stop, please." My aunts, uncles, and relatives from the bride's side ran to apologize to the guests, to the groom's family trying to salvage what little dignity remained. "We didn't know Nathan would do this," Aunt Mary shouted at a group of guests. "We're sorry." But no one cared. All eyes were glued to the screen where the documents were still being projected, and to Nick, the one trying to flee. Brooke stood alone in the middle of the hall, her white wedding dress now like a shroud over a shattered dream. She looked at me, tears flowing endlessly, her voice trembling. "Brother Nathan, why? I love Nick. I trusted him. Why did you have to do this? I wanted to run to her and hug her, to say that I did it all for her, but the hatred in her eyes made me freeze. Brooke, I said, my voice hoarse, I just wanted to protect you. But she shook her head, running out of the hall, leaving me with pain that tore through my chest. The guests gradually left, leaving the hall in chaos. Reporters still pursued the Harringtons, and I faintly heard Mrs. Helen yelling at Nick, "You've made us lose all our honor." I stood on the stage, looking down at my family. My parents, relatives, the people who had once been my support, now looking at me like an enemy. Only Aunt Teresa, still sitting in the back row, gave me a slight nod, her eyes full of pride mixed with worry. I stepped down, leaving the hotel without looking back. The sound of waves from Casco Bay echoed, but it didn't soothe the storm in my heart. I had done the right thing, but why did it hurt so much? I had saved Brooke, but perhaps I had lost her forever. I drove back to Boston, the envelope of documents still in my jacket pocket, like a reminder that the truth always comes at a price. Interstate 95 stretched out before me, hazy in the twilight, and I felt like a wanderer with no place to return to. My family, the people I loved most, now looked at me like a traitor. Brooke, the little girl who once held my hand on Old Orchard Beach, now called me the worst brother. Those words echoed in my head, sharp as knives. When I got back to my apartment in Back Bay, I tossed the keys onto the table and slumped into the chair. The room was pitch dark, with only the light from the Charles River filtering in, cold and distant. I opened my laptop and scrolled through online news sites. As expected, the chaos at the wedding had made headlines. "Elite wedding falls apart. Dark secrets of Harrington Industries exposed," screamed the title on the Portland Press Herald. Another article on the Boston Globe read, "Investigative journalist Nathan Scott destroys sister's wedding with shocking allegations." I skimmed through, my heart aching when I saw my name labeled as a destroyer. They didn't understand. No one understood that I did it all for Brooke. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Teresa. "Nathan, you did well, but be careful. The Harringtons won't let this go." I smiled faintly, grateful that at least one person was on my side. I texted back, "Thanks, Aunt. I'll be fine." But I wasn't sure if I really would be. I called Brooke, not expecting her to answer, and sure enough, it was just endless ringing before going to voicemail. "Brooke, I'm sorry for hurting you, but I just wanted you to be safe. Call me back, okay?" I hung up knowing she wouldn't. The following days were a long stretch of loneliness. I returned to the newsroom, but my colleagues looked at me strangely, half curious, half distant. "Did you really do that at your sister's wedding?" Charlie, my friend at the New York Times, asked over the phone. "You're brave, Nathan, but you know the Harringtons are hiring lawyers to sue you for slander." I smirked, not surprised. They can sue, I have proof. But deep down, I was worried. I'm not wealthy, I don't have power like the Harringtons. If they wanted revenge, I'd be in big trouble. My family had completely cut off contact. Mom didn't reply to messages, Dad didn't answer calls. Once I called Aunt Mary, hoping she'd mediate, but she was cold. "Nathan, you embarrassed the whole family. Your parents are in shock. Don't call anymore." I felt like I'd been cast out of my own family. Brooke, the one I loved most, didn't send a single text, didn't make a single call. I imagined her sitting in her room, her wedding dress still hanging on the rack, crying over her shattered dream. I wanted to rush to Portland, hug her, and say everything would be okay, but the hatred in her eyes at the wedding made me hesitate. The media wouldn't let go. Articles kept digging into the story, some siding with me, calling me a hero who exposed the truth, but most criticized me as a destroyer of family happiness. A social media comment read, "Nathan Scott is such a selfish jerk. Who ruins their sister's wedding over some rumors?" I read it with a bitter lump in my throat. Rumors? It was the truth, proven by documents, by statements, but no one cared. They just wanted sensational stories. Only Aunt Teresa stayed in touch. She called every evening, her voice warm and steady. "Nathan, You did the right thing. Don't let public opinion sway you. Once she sent me a small article buried in the Wall Street Journal's business section about major investors pulling out of Harrington Industries after the wedding scandal. You struck a heavy blow to them, she said. But be careful. They won't let it slide. I nodded over the phone, feeling both proud and exhausted. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted Brooke to be safe. I continued my work at the newsroom, trying to focus on new investigations, but every night back in the apartment, I was haunted by memories. I remembered those afternoons on Old Orchard Beach when Brooke was little, holding my hand and smiling brightly. Brother Nathan, you'll always protect me, right? The little girl asked, her eyes sparkling. Yes, always, I replied. But now that promise felt like a burden. I had protected her, but at what cost? A broken family, lost trust, and my little sister turning her back on me, leaving me to face public opinion and threats from the Harringtons alone. A week after the wedding, I received a letter from the Harrington Industries lawyers demanding I publicly retract the allegations and compensate for defamation. If not, they'd sue me for libel. I sat in the apartment reading the letter over and over, feeling cornered. I called Aunt Teresa, my voice trembling. Aunt, they want to sue me. What should I do? She replied firmly. Hold on to the evidence, Nathan. They're just bluffing. They know if it goes to court, it'll be worse for them. I'll find a lawyer to help you. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the worry still weighed heavy. I wasn't afraid of losing the case, but I was afraid of losing Brooke forever. In the days that followed, I tried to live normally, but everything had changed. The newsroom assigned me a new investigation about a pharmaceutical company in Boston, but I lacked my former passion. Every time I opened my laptop, I secretly searched for news about Brooke, hoping to see she was okay. I heard rumors from a mutual friend that she had moved back to Portland, living with our parents, but no one mentioned me. I imagined her sitting in her old room looking out at Casco Bay and wondered if she thought about me even a little. One evening, as I sat by the window overlooking the Charles River, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Teresa. Nathan, are you okay? She asked gently. I'm fine, Aunt, I said, though we both knew it was a lie. I just want to say you did the right thing. Brooke will understand, it just takes time. I nodded, though she couldn't see, and felt tears welling up in my eyes. Thank you, Aunt, I whispered. You're the only one who hasn't abandoned me. I thought about what I'd lost, family, trust, and Brooke's love. But I also thought about what I'd achieved. Preventing Brooke from entering a dangerous marriage, exposing the truth about a powerful but hollow family. I didn't regret it, but the pain didn't fade. Every night I lay in bed listening to the wind from the Charles River and wondered if there would ever be a day when my family forgave me. Would Brooke ever look at me as her brother, as her knight once more? I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the image of Brooke in her wedding dress, tears streaming down. I had done the right thing, but why did it hurt so much? I opened my laptop and started writing a new article, not for publication, but to send into the void. A letter to Brooke. Sis, I'm sorry for hurting you, but I just wanted you to be safe. One day you'll understand. I love you, always. I saved it in a hidden folder, knowing she might never read it. But I had to write it, to hold on to a sliver of hope that one day my family would come back. A year passed, but the pain felt as fresh as ever. Life in Boston continued. Long days at the newsroom, lonely nights in the Back Bay apartment, the lights from the Charles River shining through the window like a reminder of what I had lost. I still worked, investigating scandals, writing articles, but the passion that once burned fiercely in me was now just a flickering ember. Every time I opened my phone, I hoped to see a message from Brooke, a call from Mom, or even a reproach from Dad. But there was nothing. Only silence, cold and sharp, like a blade cutting into my heart every day. The media gradually forgot about the wedding fiasco. Harrington Industries, as Aunt Teresa had predicted, began to crumble. Scattered articles appeared talking about the company laying off staff, selling assets to pay debts. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the news, a headline on the Wall Street Journal made me freeze. Harrington Industries files for bankruptcy, Nick Harrington arrested for tax evasion and abuse allegations. I skimmed the article, my heart racing. Nick, the man who had once captivated my entire family, was now accused of evading millions in taxes, harassing employees, and most recently abusing a girlfriend. The image of Nick in his perfect suit with a confident smile was now replaced by a photo of him in handcuffs. His eyes panicked as he was led out of the courthouse. I sat frozen, feeling both relieved and pained. Relieved because the truth had finally been exposed, because Brooke hadn't been bound to someone like Nick. Pained because I knew she still hadn't forgiven me. I wanted to call her, to say that I had been right, but I couldn't. Brooke's words at the wedding, "I wish I didn't have you," were still like an unhealed scar. I only sent a short message to Aunt Teresa. "Aunt, Nick's been arrested." She called back immediately, her voice full of pride. "Nathan, you saved Brooke from a hellish marriage. I know it hurts, but you did the right thing." Aunt Teresa was the only light in those dark days. She called regularly, sent small gifts, a book on investigative journalism, a bottle of wine, or just a message. "Are you okay? Don't give up." She told me that my parents were still living quietly in Portland, but no one mentioned me. Brooke had moved back to work at a small advertising company in Portland, living near our parents. But Aunt said she was quieter than before, as if the shattered dream at the wedding had taken away some of her energy. I tried to keep going, but every day was a battle. I wrote articles, investigated, but my mind always wandered back to Portland, to the old wooden house, to those afternoons on Old Orchard Beach. I missed Brooke, the little girl who once held my hand and smiled brightly, believing I was her knight. I missed Mom, with her gentle smile and warm hugs. I missed Dad, though he was strict. He had always been proud when I won my first journalism award. Now they felt like distant shadows, belonging to a life I was no longer part of. One autumn evening, when golden leaves fell across Boston's streets, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Teresa. "Nathan, can you come back to Portland this weekend?" she asked, her voice slightly unusual. "What's wrong, Aunt?" I asked, my heart racing. "Just come. The family needs you." She hung up, leaving me with a barrage of questions. The family needs me? After everything that happened, after the reproaches and silence? I hesitated, but a part of me, the part that still believed in the promise I made to Brooke years ago, urged me to get in the car. I drove to Portland, my heart full of unease. When I arrived at the old wooden house, I saw my parents' and Brooke's cars parked in the yard. I took a deep breath, stepped onto the porch, my hand trembling as I knocked. Mom opened the door, and for the first time in a year, I saw her eyes red, not from anger, but from emotion. "Nathan," she whispered, then hugged me tightly. I stood stunned, unable to believe what was happening. "Mom, aren't you mad at me anymore?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She shook her head, tears streaming down. "Son, I'm sorry. I was wrong not to believe you." Dad appeared at the door, his face stern but no longer angry. "Come inside, Nathan," he said, his voice deep but not cold. I stepped into the living room and saw Brooke sitting there wearing a green sweater, her eyes averted. She looked thinner, her hair loosely tied, without the radiant smile of before. I stood silently, not knowing what to say. The atmosphere was heavy, but Aunt Teresa, sitting in the corner, smiled encouragingly. "Sit down, Nathan," she said. "The family needs to talk." Dad spoke first, his voice trembling, which was rare for someone who always maintained a tough exterior. "Nathan, I've read the news about Nick. I was wrong. I blamed you unfairly. You tried to protect Brooke, to protect the whole family, and I yelled at you." He paused, looking down at the floor as if ashamed. "I'm sorry." I felt my throat tighten, never expecting to hear these words from Dad. I nodded, saying nothing, afraid that if I spoke, I'd cry. Mom held my hand, her eyes still red. "Son, I was blind. I just wanted Brooke to be happy, but I didn't see that you were the one who knew best. I was wrong to pressure you for money, wrong not to believe you." She paused, wiping her tears. I'm proud of you for standing up, even when the whole world turned its back. I squeezed Mom's hand tightly, feeling like a part of my heart was being mended. Then I looked at Brooke. She was still silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to her. "Brooke," I said, my voice soft but firm, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to be safe." She looked up, her eyes red, and suddenly threw herself into my arms, sobbing. "Brother Nathan, I'm sorry," she choked out. "I blamed you, I hated you, but you were right. Nick, he was a monster. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." I hugged Brooke tightly, feeling like I had found the little girl who once held my hand on the beach again. "It's okay, Brooke," I whispered. "I just wanted you to be happy." She nodded, her tears soaking my shirt. "I know. Thank you for not giving up." We stood like that in the living room under the emotional gazes of our parents and Aunt Teresa's smile. After that, we sat around the dining table like the Sunday dinners of years past. Dad recounted how he had read the article about Nick, and when he saw the news of his arrest, he called Mom and Brooke to talk. "I realized I was wrong to blame you, Nathan," he said. "You were the only one who saw the truth clearly." Brooke shared that she had been shocked reading about Nick, but it was that which helped her realize how much I had sacrificed to protect her. "I thought you were jealous, brother," she said, her voice trembling. "But now I know. You just wanted the best for me." That meal wasn't with grilled meat or apple pie, just coffee and cookies Mom had made quickly, but it was the warmest meal in a year. We talked about the old days, about the times Brooke and I ran around on the beach, about the arguments and reconciliations. I looked at my family, feeling like the cracks were starting to heal. As I left Portland, I drove along the highway listening to Hotel California playing on the radio. I smiled for the first time in a year, feeling relieved. Before going, I said to Brooke, Dad, and Mom something I had kept in my heart for a long time. Love isn't always about going along with what someone wants. Sometimes it's about daring to say what others don't want to hear. They nodded, and Brooke hugged me again, whispering, "You're my knight, always." I returned to Boston carrying a hope I had lost long ago. The truth comes at a price, but sometimes it also brings the most precious things: family, love, and forgiveness. 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 Forgiveness.